See on Radio 2.
Hallo Kosmos.
Hallo maa.
Dear listeners, welcome to the radio show Hallo Kosmos on Radio 2, Estonian Public Broadcasting. My name is Ingrid Peek. My guests today are spiritual teachers Eckhart Tolle and Kim Eng. Eckhart Tolle is a spiritual teacher and author who was born in Germany and educated at the universities of London and Cambridge. At the age of 29, a profound inner transformation radically changed the course of his life. The next few years were devoted to understanding, integrating and deepening that transformation, which marked the beginning of an intense inward journey. Since 1995, he has lived in Vancouver, Canada. Eckhart Tolle is the author of the #1 New York Times bestseller, The Power of Now, and the highly acclaimed follow-up, A New Earth, which are widely regarded as two of the most influential spiritual books of our time. In 2008, approximately 35 million people participated in a series of 10 live webinars with Tolle and television talk show host Oprah Winfrey. In 2011, he was listed by the Watkins Review as the most spiritual, influential person in the world. Eckhart's profound yet simple teachings have already helped countless people throughout the world find inner peace and greater fulfillment in their lives. At the core of the teachings lies the transformation of consciousness, a spiritual awakening that he sees as the next step in human evolution. An essential aspect of this awakening consists in transcending our ego-based state of consciousness. This is a prerequisite not only for personal happiness, but also for the ending of violence on our planet. Eckhart Tolle is sought-after public speaker who teaches and travels extensively throughout the world. And so does Kim Eng, taking his teaching around the world. She is Eckhart's partner and associate. Born in Vancouver, Canada, Kim's spiritual search began in the early 80s. She met Eckhart Tolle in 1998 and soon after went through a transformational spiritual experience while attending one of his retreats. This was followed by 7 years of intense spiritual training and unfoldment, after which she began counseling and showing others how to discover their own inner teacher and healer. As a counselor and public speaker, as well as a facilitator of her presence through movement workshops, Kim has developed her own teachings, which are aimed at the transformation of consciousness through the integration of body, mind and spirit. Her retreats and workshops have taken place all over North America, Europe and Australia. This interview was recorded in Copenhagen, Denmark, on the 2nd of November and was aired on Radio 2 on 1st of December 2013. To keep yourself updated with Eckhart Tolle's teachings, please visit his website, eckharttolle.com, and to find out about the show you are listening, visit the page hallokosmos.ee, Cosmos with a K. And now, ladies and gentlemen, sit back and relax to listen to Eckhart Tolle and Kim Eng. Hello, Eckhart Tolle.
Hello, nice to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming to the radio show Hallo Kosmos, which is a big honor and such a pleasure to have you around. I've been reading your books since they came out, so I'm happy to have you on the show. Traditionally, in the beginning of the show, there is a section called Your Story, where we tell listeners how did you end up on your spiritual path, how your life journey has taken you to today and to who you are today. But as we are short on time and I have tons and tons of questions about important issues, let's cut it straight to the point. Could you please be so kind and tell us how this moment of enlightenment, this momentum of awareness, this inner transformation happened with you when you were 29 years old?
I describe it briefly in the introduction to The Power of Now. I suffered from depressions and acute anxiety for most of my 20s. And when I reached the age of 29, I was very unhappy and quite depressed. And I woke up one night in the middle of the night and felt extremely anxious. And when the thought came into my head, I cannot live with myself any longer, then I looked at the thought. I said, are there two of me, I and the self that I cannot live with? And what does that mean, I cannot live with myself? Something happened at that moment. For a long time, I didn't understand what it was. I now understand it, so I can explain briefly to you what happened. But at that time, all I knew was, next morning I awoke and I felt totally at peace. Not only at peace, everything I looked at, everything I perceived with my senses was fresh and new, as if I had just come into this world. And everyday object looked beautiful and alive. And I couldn't understand what had happened. And then I went into the city. I lived in London at the time. I went into downtown London, and everything there, even the traffic, everything seemed so peaceful. And it took me, first of all, of course, I thought this is a temporary thing. I probably lose it again soon. But somehow I didn't lose it. The peace continued, not always as strong as on the first day, but it continued. It was always there, sometimes in the background, and at other times very strongly in the foreground of my life. And then I started to explore spiritual teachings and reading spiritual books, because I needed to find out what the meaning was of this sudden peace. And after about 2 or 3 years of investigating, I looked into Buddhism, and I read ancient Indian texts, and I reread the Gospels, the New Testament. I read the Tao Te Ching. I investigated other cults and movements, and I began to realize what actually had happened to me, and that is that my consciousness had withdrawn its identification from thinking. So I was able to step out of thinking, and what remained, when I disidentified in the moment of looking at the sentence, I cannot live with myself, I realized deep down that the self was ultimately not real, but only the I remained, and the I was consciousness itself, unconditioned consciousness, not my personal history, unconditioned consciousness. And before, I was completely identified with every thought that went through my head, and many thoughts that went through my head were unhappy thoughts, thoughts that were telling me that my life was not good, the uncertainty about my future, anxiety-provoking thoughts, and so on. So I hadn't realized that my unhappiness, my anxiety, which I thought was caused by the circumstances of my life, actually had been caused by my thoughts about my circumstances and my life. And that night, that stream of unconscious thinking stopped, and the entire sense of self that was associated with this unconscious thinking subsided, dissolved, so that ultimately fictitious entity dissolved. And I understood that when I came into contact with Buddhism, where Buddha says the self is ultimately not real. The self is an illusion. And that illusory mind-made self, that night, dissolved. I was no longer identified with it, and I could realize my essential identity as consciousness itself, awareness, consciousness. That is a very liberating realization. But if you had asked me at that time to explain, I couldn't have done that. all I knew was very peaceful. Suddenly life has become very peaceful. It's only after investigating for several years I began to understand how it happened. And then this shift in consciousness that happened to me became a teaching. Then gradually people would come to me, ask questions, and gradually I was able to guide people into also becoming aware of their own minds, what I later called the voice in the head, that many people, most people still, are completely identified with. Another word for it is the self-talk. Most people, throughout their waking life, talk to themselves in their heads all the time. Sometimes we see people in the streets who talk out aloud and we say they are mad, but there's not a huge difference between those so-called mad people that talk to themselves aloud in the street and everybody else who is considered normal, and they are talking to themselves continuously in their head, and in many cases they don't even know it because they are so identified with the voice that they have become the voice. And for many people that voice is a very unpleasant voice. It continuously judges them, it criticizes them, it complains a lot. It complains about other people or situations. Some are more critical of others, others critical of themselves. So there are many people for whom the voice is actually a torture, but they have to live with it. They don't realize that they could be free. So if you had to live with somebody like that, if that was somebody, your partner, if your partner did that to you, that what for many people their voice does to them, you would leave them. You couldn't stand being with them. So the freedom, the liberation that is possible for humans, which is also what we call the awakening. To awaken, spiritually speaking, means to awaken from this complete identification with the voice in the head. And so the first step is you take one step back and suddenly realize that there is a voice. Then you suddenly realize the kind of things that it repeatedly says to you. And that's the beginning of the awakening. It's you step out of the voice in the head and then you realize there is another dimension of consciousness in you, and that is, you could call it awareness or presence. So that's what happened to me that night, and that is what later became the teaching.
Has this experience remained? Since it happened, have you been on this state of awareness, being connected with your consciousness purely all the time?
Yes, it has remained all the time. What does change is the intensity of it. Sometimes it's only a sense of peace in the background. I never completely get drawn back into the mind. There's always a space of freedom, if only in the background, and sometimes very strongly in the foreground. There are still many spaces during a normal day when I think very little. There are large spaces of just awareness, but little or no conceptual thinking, like the voice in the head doesn't talk that much anymore. It still talks occasionally, but even when it does talk occasionally, I know that's not who I am, and it never causes me unhappiness anymore. It doesn't have the power to cause unhappiness, but my ability to actually think more constructively has become enhanced. So I can use my mind in a much more effective way now than I could before, when I was still in my 20s, when I was identified with it. I sometimes give the example of a person sitting in a car. The car is not moving, the engine is running, the gear is in neutral, and you're putting your foot on the accelerator for hours, and the engine goes boom, boom, boom. You're not getting anywhere, but you think you are, and that's the useless thinking for most people. And if you do that to a car, it wears out the engine very quickly, And so the engine cannot operate effectively anymore. And the same thing happens to many human beings, because they do so much useless and repetitive thinking that they cannot really use their mind very effectively anymore. The mind is not creative. It's just like an old record that repeats the same old stories, the same old complaints, the same anxieties created day after day. And it's a terrible fate, but it's considered very normal still.
But this, what you described about yourself, this change, this awareness, constant awareness, can this be defined as enlightenment? Because nowadays, most of the spiritual people, they seek for enlightenment. They want to become Buddha, so to say, in the original meaning of this word. Is this then enlightenment?
Yes, that's what it is. That's what it means.
That doesn't seem so impossible. Like
no, it's not.
Something far, far, and
yes,
it takes lifetimes to
that's
reach.
An illusory image that the mind has created of what enlightenment is, in the same way that it has made teachers, spiritual teachers, who had this realization, who did go through the awakening, but the human mind made them into unreachable gods. The Buddha, for example. An interesting fact is that after the Buddha's death, now first of all, Buddha wasn't his name. Later, people gave him the title Buddha, which means the one who is awake. And of course, as we know now, awake means no longer identified with your mind. So for several hundred years, I think 400 or 500 years after the death of the Buddha, there was not yet a single Buddha image. There were no images. But later, the Buddha became more and more a godlike figure. They don't call him a god, but he's basically treated as a god. And they did the same to Jesus. So Jesus also had a very profound teaching. And instead of living the teaching, they have to make the teacher into somebody totally unreachable. In the case of Jesus, he very clearly said, for example, all the things that I do and greater things you can also do. And he also said, I'm not doing anything, it's the Father in me speaks and does things. And when he used the word Father, of course he meant a deeper consciousness in him, the true intelligence, the unconditioned consciousness in him. He used Father because he lived in a patriarchal society. If he had lived in a matriarchal society, he would have said the mother.
Now to the first big question. You teach us that we need a radical shift of consciousness, total transformation, revolution, the awakening of the whole humanity. And yesterday you also said that that is not only possibility but necessity for the humankind to survive on this planet. How to activate this kind of awakening processes globally, and how to get the timing right as well, so it's not too late and we have destroyed ourselves and everything. Also, you say, and you said that yesterday as well, that this awakening wants to happen. Is it possible to orchestrate this kind of process from the level of the human consciousness and human awareness then? Or is it something bigger, something beyond us as souls in human form? Because at some point I would like to know what is your vision about the question who or what is God? Of course, that's the eternal question we all want to know. So could you please visualize and describe this new earth that we are hoping to happen? Let's say we all awake today. What will the world be like then tomorrow? The world where people are awakened and raised above their ego to the deeper state of consciousness. And of course, how to achieve all that.
Yes. Now, the awakening before, as I pointed out in the talk last night, in past ages, it only happened to a few individuals here and there. It was more like a possibility, but not a necessity. One could almost call it a luxury for humans to awaken. But now, because the way in which human civilization has developed, with all the technological and scientific knowledge that we have, That knowledge, if we do not go through a transformation of consciousness, is going to be, and already is, very dangerous. It has many dangerous consequences, starting from atomic weapons to the enormous amount of pollution that we create while we are engaged in manufacturing things and so on. So there are huge problems that we are facing, including still the big problem of warfare between nations, even within nations. So there is now, because collectively awakening has become a necessity, there is now an awakening that's already spontaneously happening in a number of human beings. I cannot give you an exact percentage, but I can intuitively guess in many parts of the world it's about 10% at the moment that are not awakened, but where human beings in whom the awakening process is beginning. And those are the ones who are then also drawn to spiritual teachings like this teaching, because they realize that by coming into contact with the teaching, it actually accelerates or deepens the awakening process. I need to add that in my case, the awakening happened very suddenly, and then there was never a going back. In most cases, for most human beings, the awakening does not happen all at once and suddenly, but it happens as a process. So there's some disidentification from the mind, then they fall back into identification with the mind, and they step out again, and gradually there's greater freedom, and they are less possessed by their mind. So it's a gradual awakening for many people. There are also differences depending on where on the planet you look. There are areas on the planet, and they tend to be areas where there's a lot of violence, that are still at an earlier stage of development collectively. So there are areas on the planet where the collective consciousness of particular and certain nations would correspond approximately to the European consciousness 1,000 years ago. For example, Afghanistan, there still corresponds approximately to what Europe was 1,000 years ago, what the function that religion has there, how it is used often in the service of the ego. Now, this does not mean that places like that, there cannot be individuals who are already awakened, in the same way that in the Middle Ages in Europe, although in many ways we call it the Dark Ages, and they were dark, but even there were individuals who were already awakened. It's a very interesting phenomenon. So we are still living in different time periods on the planet, and even in large countries like the United States, really there are many different energy fields there. It's more like a continent than a country. So the awakening is happening. It is gradually accelerating. Now, whether it will happen in time to save the planet,
or the humankind, because planet will still be there.
Yes, the planet most likely will continue, but humans may or may not. I feel more the likelihood that humans are going to make it is greater than the likelihood that humans are not going to make it as a species. But really, humans are an expression in form of the one consciousness that pervades the entire universe. And this one consciousness wants to manifest itself in this dimension here. And it can use any life form to manifest through it, and it is doing it. So on our planet, it happens to be the humans who are at the forefront of the awakening of consciousness. But everything participates in this movement of consciousness manifesting itself, and eventually, there's a saying in Buddhism, that eventually every life form will participate in the awakening, of course, that of course would mean a complete transformation. The world as we know it would then no longer exist. So you are asking also, what's the world going to look like if let's assume that all humans awaken tomorrow. Now, it's almost impossible to imagine what the world would look like, but one thing we can be certain, we know what the world would not look like, and that is what it looks like now when you listen to the news every day, and what it will not be like the history of the 20th century, where humans have killed each other at the rate of, nobody knows the exact figure, 150 million or 200 million humans killing each other in just one century alone is completely insane. So what we know is the world that humans create will no longer be as insane. The insanity will be gone. So it will be a world where humans can interact with each other and experience a loving energy when they interact with each other. They know the sense of separation between human beings will disappear. The continuous judgment of other humans, or the identification of the egoic identification of groups that identify and make the others into enemies, that's been going on for thousands of years. The tribal consciousness, the ethnocentric consciousness, the egocentric consciousness, these are all delusions, forms of delusion, and those delusions are going to dissolve. So it's the end of violence, and humans will become more creative. I know that because I observed the change in myself as the shift in consciousness happened. I was able to contribute something to the world, to help other humans to awaken. And every human being who goes through the awakening, even if they are not yet fully awakened, will already contribute to a change in the outer world, because you act in a different way. You no longer create suffering for yourself or others. So you contribute something positive to the world, something that is healing, love, or another word, the Dalai Lama used the word, he always uses the word kindness, which really is, to use another English word, it's a benevolence that then flows out from human beings to other human beings and to nature. So we are not going to destroy nature. We're not going to use nature and destroy it. We will recognize that nature and the planet are actually sacred. When you're no longer completely trapped in the conceptual mind, then you can approach nature and you can sense that there's something very precious there. You can walk through a forest and you can sense there is a sacred space there, which you cannot do when you are trapped completely in the conceptual mind. Then you can label, you can call it, this is that, but you never get the deeper sense of what nature really is. The empathy, and that's the important word, when you are trapped in your mind only, you do not have empathy with other life forms. You cannot have real empathy with humans. Even if you try very hard to be a good human being, Christians have tried for a long time to love their neighbor as themselves, but not many have succeeded.
Maybe they don't love themselves.
Well, they haven't stepped out of an illusory self-identity in their minds. They haven't discovered who they essentially are. So to love the other as yourself, you need to discover who you are beyond the limited person with your personal history. Who are you beyond your personal history, beyond that mentally created self-image? And every human being can begin to realize that if they become still inside, allow a thought to come to an end, For example, now, of course, we're on the radio, so we need to continue. We can't be silent for too long because then people will switch off. But allow a thought to come to an end, like now. And what is left when you're not thinking, but you're still conscious? And you can still perceive things. You can look around. You can perceive. And you discover the ability in yourself to perceive without needing to interpret. And so without needing to attach labels on everything you perceive, without needing to name everything compulsively all the time, then you become free of your conditioning, and then who you really are emerges as a space of consciousness, deeper, far deeper than your personal identity. So this is where you, as a person, merge with something much deeper, much vaster. And so this is the spiritual dimension. And this ultimately is where you realize your oneness with something that you cannot speak of, that traditionally is called God in certain religions, not in Buddhism, because the Buddha never wanted to use that word, because the Buddha very wisely realized the moment you use the word God, humans are going to make it into another mental concept. So the Buddha avoided the use of the word God, and when people asked the Buddha, is there a God? Traditionally, they say, when he was asked that question, he kept noble silence. And that in itself is an important pointer, because when they asked him, is there a God? There was just a silent space. He didn't answer it, but the answer was in the silence. So, is there a God? It's only when the stream of thinking stops and you realize you are still there, but not as a thinking entity, but you are still there as consciousness. That consciousness is, so to speak, the light that emanates from God. It's one with God. You realize your oneness with the source of all life. And that is not an impossible goal. That is possible for many human beings. It may not be possible, not for everybody, perhaps in this lifetime yet, but for many human beings on the planet, it is possible to realize that, even if they do not go to the very deepest realization, at least to touch something in yourself that you sense has enormous power and is one ultimately with who you are. So you are connected to an enormous power, the only power there is in the universe. You are connected with that, and then that is an enormous relief, because then it's only then that you're no longer anxious about your life anymore, because then you feel you are carried by something vast. And really, what then develops in you is a trust. You begin to trust in life, because that is life in its unmanifested form, or rather no form. So you're carried by that one life, and you begin to trust it. That's the real meaning of the religious term faith. Faith is a religious term. In some languages, faith and belief are the same word. In German, for example, faith and belief are both Glaube. But it's a good thing that in English there are two words, because belief obviously means you believe that a particular story is true, or you believe that there is a God, or you believe this or that. Belief always means you don't know, because the moment you know, you cannot use belief anymore. You wouldn't say, I believe in this table, because it's obviously there. But so belief and knowing are very different things. Belief is usually associated with mental concepts or stories. And it's to say that you are saved when you believe in a particular story that you are told, that is obviously quite absurd. To believe in a story and to say everybody who believes in this story is saved, they do that in Christianity. Of course you're not saved, you just have a belief, and a communist has a belief in another story, interprets the world in another way. And you can see that when you look at the history of Christianity, a lot of violence is there, a lot of suffering. They have inflicted a lot of pain on each other and on other human beings, and obviously they all believed in the same story, and yet they tortured other human beings. So obviously that doesn't save you. It's something, but that wasn't what Jesus was talking about at all. He wasn't talking about that kind of belief. He was talking about faith. And faith is a deep trust in life. But you can't have that conceptually in your mind. You can never have trust in concepts. You have to step out of concepts. You have to come to where thinking subsides, and suddenly you realize underneath your thoughts, if you go deep enough, at first you may find certain turbulent emotions. And then if you go deeper beyond that, become very present in the present moment is a key for going deeper. You go into yourself, and then there's a stillness there in everybody. And you become comfortable with that stillness, and that is your deepening. And then you sense, at first the stillness seems like nothing at all. It's, oh, there's nothing happening. But if you stay with it, then you realize that stillness, there's also a presence there. It's essentially your presence, but it goes beyond the limited person. And that's a wonderful realization that you are, apart from being a person for a few years, you are also a deeper presence without which there could be no person. And that's the one thing that never changes. There's always that underlying sense of, that's the deeper meaning of I when you say the word I. The I can have a very superficial meaning. You can refer, when you say the word I, you can refer to me and my history. That's the personal sense of I, and that's what most people refer to when they say I. But there's a deeper meaning to I, which is to realize your beingness, the I am, which in the Old Testament is called the I am. When God is asked, what's your name? And that's perhaps the most profound line in the Old Testament. And God is asked, what is your name? And the answer God gives is, I am that I am. So really God is saying, I am the I am. And so you can realize God as the deepest sense of I am, the beingness that you feel inside yourself. I could ask you, for example, right now, what does it feel like to be yourself? Now that's a strange question. Most people would start thinking about their life circumstances, or they would start thinking about their personal history, but this is not what the question refers to. What does it feel like to be yourself? You don't need to remember your personal history. We want something deeper, more essential. What is the essential feeling of being you, of I? And you cannot define exactly what it is. You have to experience that. Experience, I sometimes say, experience your own presence. Can you feel your own presence without needing to remember your past, without needing to remember your name? Let's imagine that you forget your past, you forget that you have a future, you forget your name. What is left? And you may be surprised to find that what is left is a deeper sense of I. And that is what all the ancient teachings and also Jesus pointed to. I am the way, the truth, and the life. This is somewhere Jesus said in the Gospels. And I would like to suggest that when they wrote down what he said, they forgot one little word. At the moment it reads, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And the word they forgot is is. I am is the way, the truth, and the life. He points to the possibility that every human can realize this deeper I am for themselves. And that then in mystical Christianity, which is a true Christianity, that is called Christ consciousness. And in Buddhist terms, it would be called Buddha nature. You discover your Buddha nature, which transcends your personal self. Or in Christian terms, you realize that apart from your personal consciousness, which is conditioned by your past, there is the unconditioned consciousness, which is the consciousness of Christ, the same consciousness. Again, Christ is nobody's name, it's a title given.
But what's the end goal then? You told that there is this consciousness, the collective consciousness, the everything, the God, the absolute, that wants to manifest through human form. Can that then be the answer? Why do we exist in the world of form? Also, the other thought that came to my mind when I was listening to you is that there seems to be eternal fight of good and evil in our dualistic world. Can that refer to the possible end goal, that to conquer the evil and so the good can prevail? Or what's the point of all existence?
Well, we need to have some humility, and we need to admit that through our limited human conceptual mind, we will never understand the magnitude of the universe. That's totally impossible. There is a knowing that every human can reach in themselves that cannot be expressed conceptually. What you can express conceptually is very limited, because when you ask me a question, I'm using language which only really consists of a sequence of sounds produced by the vocal cords. Or if you read a text in a book, there's only a very limited number of letters in the alphabet, and the basic sounds are the vowel sounds, R, A, E, O, U, or in English, A, E, Y, U. Those are the basic sounds. And to imagine that by putting a few symbols together, or a sequence of sounds produced by the vocal cords, you could explain the universe. It's totally impossible. Humans have tried it, but sometimes you can get distant approximations of what it might be like. This is why Jesus always uses parables. He says, the kingdom of heaven is like this, or the kingdom of heaven is like that. So he doesn't explain it, but says it's a little bit like this. They're almost like poetic images that he gives. So your question, of course, is about the ultimate destiny of the universe, and that is so vast that my vocal cords cannot give you an answer, and no concepts would be adequate to give you that answer. But what I can say, with the limitations of my vocal cords, is that the universe wants two things. And you can verify that in yourself. I know this because I know myself, and every human is a microcosm. In some ways, every human being reflects the entire universe. So the universe wants two things. One is it wants to create forms. How do I know that? Well, just look around on this planet alone, how continuously, every second, millions of life forms in the sea, on land, in the air, forms that you can see, other forms that are so tiny you cannot see. But the universe delights in creating its inexhaustible creative capacities So it creates and creates, and it must delight in it, otherwise it wouldn't do it. The universe is doing, and we itself are an expression, you and I are an expression of the creativity of the universe, the infinite creativity of the universe. So there's no doubt that the universe loves creating. And there's no doubt that the universe loves hiding from itself its own identity, because every entity that it creates believes it's an independent entity. It's not. That's so. Now we come to the other thing that the universe wants. It wants to create. And the creation of the universe into billions and billions and billions of life forms, which no life form lasts very long, by the way, as we know. So they're fleeting, they're all very fleeting. They come into being, grow, reach maturity, and then go old and dissolve. And that's a continuous process. Human bodies do it, animal bodies, vegetative life, everywhere. It's created, and then disappears again. Comes into being, disappears. An amazing process. So the universe is like a dream. It's dreaming, it is creating, but what we see as creation is the universe dreaming this universe into existence. But what the universe also wants is to awaken in the middle of the dream. And this is what happens when humans awaken. When a human being awakens, really what's happening is that the universe is beginning to awaken as a human, within the human form, is beginning to awaken and recognize its own essential nature, which is your own essential nature. Because sometimes humans think they exist in the universe. Here's me and there's the rest of the universe, but that's not how it is. You, I, every human being, we are the universe. We are one of countless expressions of the universe. So when you awaken, when you disidentify from your mind forms, and you realize your essential nature is consciousness, then the universe is realizing that its essential nature is consciousness. And the universe wants to awaken in the middle of this wonderful dream that it has created. It wants to have a lucid dream. It wants to experience the dream of this incredible universe, which really is its own self, which has embodied in countless life forms. While it continues to create, it now wants to have a lucid dream so that it doesn't lose itself completely. That was fine for a few million years. But now it wants to enter the next stage of the dream, which is be conscious in the midst of all this wonderful creation. And this is the stage that we are at now. So the universe wants to continue to create, but in the midst it also wants to awaken to its own essential nature. And that in humans, in yourself, you can see it as a tendency. You want to take action, you want to participate in the world, you want to create one way or another, participate in the act of creation, but you want to this is the word, to becoming this, becoming that, but you also want to know who you essentially are. You also want to go deeply into the present moment. You also want to be deeply at peace. You also want to realize that there is a place in you where you don't need anything, where you are already complete. And that's a deeper dimension. So on the one hand, you still feel you need to do things, but if you go deep enough, you realize there's already a sense of completeness in you. And so these are the two tendencies of the universe, which I sometimes call the outgoing movement and the homecoming movement. Those two are at work in the human being and in the universe at large. So really, I don't think there's much more that anybody can say in words about the nature of the universe. So with the limitations of my vocal cords, I have said perhaps what is possible to say, and the rest needs to be your own realization, your own recognition. You are a microcosm of the entire universe. You know that scientists tell us that it started with a big bang. The universe was started from nothingness, and of course no scientist can tell you what that nothingness is. They can't go there because it's nothing. So there was no time, and then suddenly it began to create form. Forms started to arise. And of course we are still engaged, we are still in this expansion of creativity, but there's also a homecoming movement. There's a theory, and which may be true as far as the outer world is concerned, that at some point the universe will contract again and become that single point again, and then again disappear into nothingness. The same thing is really the reflection. If the heartbeat in the human body expands and contracts. The in-breath and the out-breath in the human body. There's the out-breath, the universe breathes out, it manifests as form, expands, and then it breathes in again. Everything returns to the one. And then the many come again, and then the return movement, the in-breath, and then there's only the one. So these are the movements of the universe that are reflected in the human body.
That is a great explanation. Thank you. Good to know so much about universe and its goals. But let's talk about one of the most important thing, which is ego, with its self-importance. And you have said that the awakening of consciousness, this awareness is inside each and every one of us, and also that we should accept life as it is, to have trust, to be persistently aware. So first part of the question is how to find this trust, this unconditional acceptance of life in every situation, considering that people's lives are like hazard, they have troubles, worries, hardships, conflicts, fights for survival, crazy life tempo, sufferings, whatever, typical life of modern man. And secondly, how to create these conditions in your everyday lives for that liberation from the ego, from the dominance of the ego.
Yeah.
How can we find this switch from ego to awareness? Is there some kind of specific direction or attitude you could point out to us for that? Some kind of easy formula,
yes.
the key,
yes.
the essence of this act, the practical advice, something that,
yes.
And now I switch.
Yes, that's a good question, and exactly that. And that is called the present moment. Now, we need to realize that most human beings who are totally in the egoic consciousness in their minds, they pay very little attention to the present moment. There's always the next moment that's more important. Or for older people, there's always the past that's more important. So what people don't realize, first of all, is that the only thing you ever have is the present moment. Your entire life unfolds as the present moment. Your life is never not the present moment. But this is a fact, of course, that everybody has to agree with. But people don't live like that. They don't live as if this were true. They live as if the opposite were true, that future is more important. And so there's always, the present moment for most people is only a stepping stone to the next moment, which unconsciously they think, I need to get there. There's always something more important in the next moment that they need to get to. So they reduce the present moment, which is all they ever have, just to a means to an end, because in their minds, they're always in their minds, and the mind wants to be already in the next moment. So that creates stress, it creates anxiety, and you then reach the end of your life, and you have never really lived You've always lived for another moment. And that's how many human beings live. And really that happens because their excessive identification with thinking, because it's only as thought that the next moment exists. And the past also. The next moment, which is the future, has no actual existence except as a thought in your head. Anybody can verify that in their own lives because nobody has ever experienced the future. If it existed, somebody would have experienced it at some point, surely, but you can't. You cannot experience the future because when it comes, it's the now. You cannot experience the past because when it happened, it was the now, and when you remember it, it's still the now. It's always now. There is no life apart from now. Your entire life is now. And so to realize the incredible importance of the present moment, that's already the beginning of a shift in your conscious attention. And you can then say, okay, since the present moment is all I ever have, I might as well give more attention to it. I might as well appreciate it more, and I might as well become more friendly with it than I have been so far in my life, because many humans are not friendly with the present moment. They're always, wherever they are unhappy where they are unhappy who they're with. The present moment is all there ever is. So when you realize the importance of the present moment, then what you do is you no longer live internal opposition to the present moment, but as I put it in very simple terms, you make the present moment your friend, not your enemy. You become friendly with whatever arises in the moment. So you don't get upset when something happens because you begin to accept the isness, this is the term I use, you begin to accept the isness of the present moment. This is what is. If you argue with what is, you create suffering, and you do it in your mind. The mind does it automatically. So there was a spiritual practice, I mentioned it last night, recommended a few hundred years ago by a Zen teacher, and it is so simple, but enormously effective. If our listeners want to choose one spiritual practice or the rest of their lives that would be the most effective, I would recommend that one. And the practice is, this was given to a Zen monk when he went off to go travel around the world and said, "Please tell me, Master," he said, "can you give me the most powerful spiritual teaching that you have so that I can take it with me on my journey?" And the master, of course, the Zen masters always give very surprising answers, if they give an answer at all. So he said, yes, wherever you are, or whatever situation you are in, or whatever happens in your life, say these words: "Thanks for everything, I have no complaint whatsoever." So no matter what happens, say that. "Thanks for everything, I have no complaint whatsoever." Now the story goes that this monk then went off, and 2 years later he came back to the master and said, "Well, I've been practicing this mantra that you gave me. It's just not working. It's not working for me. I haven't woken up, and I'm still the same as before." And the master said, well, he raised his finger and said, "Thanks for everything. I have no complaint whatsoever." And as the story goes, at that moment, the monk realized the deeper meaning of those words, which he had only used superficially. He hadn't really meant it. And now he realized that when you mean those words, you no longer resist the present moment, ever. And when you give up your resistance to the present moment, the ego, this mind-made self, dissolves, because it lives in opposition always to life. It says, me, an inner space opens up, you become the space for whatever is happening in this moment. You become deep. This is how you access, by accepting totally this moment as it is, by living in complete inner alignment with this moment, you realize how deep you are, and suddenly there's a deep peace, and you go beyond the ego. So just by accepting this moment, and there are two aspects to this spiritual practice that are recommended by the Master. One is, he said, thanks for everything. That's number one. I have no complaint whatsoever. No complaint means the mind is not arguing with what is. Thanks for everything means you have an attitude of thankfulness for everything in your life, which of course is always now. So you are thankful, which means appreciative of everything that's around you, for example. You're appreciative of the sky, of the trees, even the artificial light in this room, or the chair you're sitting on. It's all lovely, it's fine. People have made this chair so that you can sit on it. People have made this table so that we can use it. People are working so that we can have electric light. And then the universe has brought you the sun, or the stars in the sky, the wind, the air you breathe. You become thankful for the air that you're breathing. It's so wonderful, and it's all in the present moment. You appreciate whatever there is in the present moment. And of course, sometimes things happen that you may not like, but there particularly, it's important to still say thank you. We were recently had a retreat, a spiritual retreat in Assisi, which is the birthplace of Saint Francis, the famous Christian saint, and he lived there for most of his life. And one of his main teachings and main way of life was to be thankful even for bad things. So when he fell ill, he would say, "Oh, thank you so much for being ill." Or when he didn't have enough to eat, he said, "Oh, thank you." Everything he was thankful for, even things that normally humans would be unhappy about. When he was cold, didn't have enough firewood. "Oh, thank you for this, the cold." Uncompromising acceptance of the present moment. So just this attitude of gratitude is very important, because it helps you stay connected with the present moment. And then you see that there's so much good in the present moment. Even if your mind tells you your life is not good enough, you have to separate out. I call it, there's your life situation, past and future, but there's also the aliveness of the present moment. Don't ignore that. Start with that. And if you think you have lots of problems, ask yourself, this is a wonderful, liberating yourself from the delusion of problems. Ask yourself, what problem do I have at this moment? And then your attention has to move into this moment, and you will always realize that at this moment you don't actually have a problem. It's perhaps the next moment, but not this one. Now, you might have a challenge that you might need to take some action. If the door opens and a wild animal comes in and attacks us, we would take some action, but it's not a problem. It's a challenge, and if it's a real challenge, you take action. But problem is something that the mind manufactures and thinks about and thinks about and thinks about when no action is possible right now. And so if you think you're burdened with problems, come into the present moment and realize, actually, this moment is actually not bad at all. And what is bad was created by your mind, projecting itself into some future circumstances or remembering something unpleasant. And so you get out of your mind, use the present moment as the doorway into a different state of consciousness. You asked me what's the easiest and quickest way for transformation, and is the now. It's the present moment. That's the most spiritual thing there is, the now. That's why I call that book The Power of Now. And of course, in the deepest sense, the now is life itself. The now is inseparable from who you essentially are. At the deepest level, the now is consciousness itself, which makes everything possible. But to make it more simple again, realize this is it. The now is all I ever have. I might as well make it into a good now. And it depends what attitude you show to it. If you continuously dislike the now, then life, you really dislike life, because life and now are one. So if you reduce the now to a means to an end, or you treat the now as if we're an obstacle that you have to overcome, and many humans live like that. I need to get somewhere. They're always restless, uneasy, never. So basically, the now is an obstacle to them, which means life. You treat life as if it were an obstacle. It's an absurd way to live. And then, of course, life reflects that back to you. Life always reflects your basic state of consciousness back to you. And then life gives you one obstacle after another, because that is your basic attitude. Present moment living really is the key to transformation. It's always there. Thankfulness and acceptance. And people sometimes think if they accept the present moment, they'll get stuck in circumstances they don't want to be stuck in. But the opposite is true. If you continuously resist internally, you're much more likely to be stuck in the same situation. Often people find the moment they accept completely, life begins to change. The moment you feel good about the present moment, then circumstances change much more easily than for a person who feels negative about the present moment, who resists. You know the English saying, what you resist persists. And many people have told me they experience it the moment they start practicing, they realize as life suddenly begins to flow with much greater ease when they internally become friendly with the present moment. Then things begin to change. But you don't need anymore for things to change. You're already okay with life. And that's the beauty of it. And that's it.
So at the end of every show, I have a small questionnaire where all the guests answer to next 5 questions. You can answer either way, humorously, short, long, whatever, but there are a few questions. First of them is, what is the meaning of life?
Well, I already explained that. The meaning of life is to awaken, to realize who you essentially are beyond being the person. That's the deeper meaning of life. And without that, your life doesn't really fulfill itself. You can only have a fulfilled life by going deeper into yourself and realizing who you are beyond the person.
What will the tomorrow bring, and how and to where shall we move on from here as individuals and as humankind?
If you live in alignment with the present moment, then that state of harmony will be reflected in what tomorrow brings, which, by the way, never comes, because tomorrow is only a thought in the head. But if you live in basic alignment and harmony with the present moment, the so-called tomorrow will look after itself.
What should a person do or know to be happy? The formula of happiness.
The formula of happiness is to accept and welcome whatever life brings to you in the present moment. Is the key for happiness. Otherwise, you will never be happy for long. It's only by living in that oneness with the present moment that happiness can be there. You can only be happy now. If you're not happy now, you're not going to be happy in the future, not for long.
If you are appointed to an assignment to greet aliens from the space in the name of humankind, what would you say to them?
I would say to them, you are coming to a planet that is still evolving, and we are just emerging from a state of collective delusion into a more awakened state. So please have some patience with us and be compassionate.
What do you recommend for listeners to investigate for some more?
Well, I recommend that if you find a spiritual book that you respond to, that is meaningful, don't just read it once. Live with certain books that you find powerful and refer to them repeatedly. To the Power of Now or New Earth, you can read those books many times, but you don't always need to read the whole book. Open it anywhere, read 1 or 2 pages, no longer for the information, but to enter that state of consciousness. So use books to enter that state of presence, to help you enter the state of presence. It's not so much additional information, but it's about helping spiritual teachings to step out of your mind and to be present.
Thank you, Eckhart Tolle, very much for coming to the show Hallo Kosmos in Radio 2 in Estonian Public Broadcasting.
Thank you. Very much. I wish you well, and I hope we will meet again in the present moment.
And we hope to see you in Estonia.
Yes, on my next Europe trip.
Great.
I'll be there.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much. Thanks. Hello, Kimeng.
Hello.
Thank you very much for coming to the show Hallo Kosmos in Radio 2 in Estonian Public Broadcasting. Traditionally, in the beginning of the show, I always introduce the guest to the listeners. This section is called Your Story. So we would like to know your story as well. How did you happen on the way of spirituality? And of course, please tell us, how did you went through a transformational spiritual experience while attending one of the Eckhart Tolle retreats? What happened there, and how did your life changed after that?
Well, I came to the spiritual practice, you can say, through great suffering. I was deeply depressed. And in Canada, we have a medical insurance plan. And back then, I had very little money. So I had this medical insurance, but you can only see psychiatrists. So if you went to an alternative counseling, it would not be covered. So the psychiatrist, of course, wanted to put me on antidepressants. But something inside me just went, this is not going to work. Antidepressants is not going to cure me. There was just that intuitive knowing. I'm not against antidepressants. I feel that it could work for some people in some cases, but I'm just talking about for me. There was something inside me that knew it would not do the trick, so to speak. So each week I'd have a weekly session with him, and each week I'd go back and he says, Kim, you've got to go on to these antidepressants. You must go on. Because I felt very suicidal as well. And of course they can't force you, although they can force you if he really thought so. He can put me in a hospital or something. But I wasn't that far gone yet. I was just depressed. And then one day in a session he says, look, I have some, little packages, just to give you, just in case you want to try it. Here they are. It's just a little package. And so I took it. And one night I was again going through that deep depression, so I decided to take it. And around the same time, 1 or 2 days later, a friend of mine said, I want to gift you a spiritual retreat, for you to go on a silent retreat. So I went, oh, okay, I'll do that. I'll go on a silent retreat. I had read many books. At that time, I didn't know about Eckhart, so I didn't read his book yet, but I read many other Eastern spiritual books. So I understood with my mind, but it was not connecting yet. Nothing was, the transformation wasn't happening because I only understood it with my mind. So I went on this spiritual silent retreat, and it was my first silent retreat. It was a 7-day retreat. And I got my first glimpse of the stillness within. And when I got that first glimpse, I decided to throw away the antidepressants. So I was only not even a week yet on antidepressants, so it hadn't kicked into my system yet. But I said to myself, if I commit myself and devote myself to my spiritual practice, if this doesn't work, then I'll just kill myself, because I just felt like it was at my last straw, you know? So I threw away the antidepressants, and that was my commitment. I made my commitment. Commitment to my meditation, to my spiritual practice, to awakening. Not to say that it was uphill. It wasn't easy. I still went through many ups and downs. But I was committed that, because I got that glimpse, so I knew what it was like. I experienced directly, and not just reading through books and understanding through books. I experienced directly the peace that passes all understanding, the joy that is uncaused. It was there. I felt it. It was in me. And that began my real committed spiritual practice. And then I'm not quite sure how many weeks or months later, I was introduced to Eckhart Tolle's teaching. A friend of mine called me up and said, do you know we have a spiritual teacher living right here in Vancouver? And I'm like, no, who is this person? Oh, his name is Eckhart Tolle. He wrote this book called The Power of Now. And he's giving a workshop this weekend. Do you want to come with me? I said, sure, I'll come with you. But I thought I would go and get the book to see what it's about. And as I said, I didn't have much money at that time. And it was only a hardcover book. So I looked at the price, and it was, I don't know, whatever it was, $25 or $30. But his workshop was only $5. So I said, well, I'll pay the $5 first, and then if I like his teaching, I'll buy the book. And of course, I liked his teaching. And we had a mutual friend that I had saw at the event, and that was a friend of Eckhart's as well, and he introduced us. That began the relationship in terms of, the teaching, being introduced to that. And I would help out Eckhart a lot, because that was my way to sort of pay my dues, so to speak, to be able to hear him speak. I went away, I traveled to India. I decided, my daughter, she had finished school and decided to go to Australia to live and work, and I thought this was my chance to go to India, a place that I've always wanted to been to and really do my spiritual practice. By the time I came back, Eckhart just grew in terms of audience, like 4 times the amount of people. And he asked me to help him. And then we just kind of became closer and became friends, and our relationship on another level started.
But where are you right now with your development? If he is enlightened, where are you? Are you enlightened as well?
We can say that we are all enlightened. We are in a sense, because we are awareness itself. But I'm still going through the process. So for Eckhart, it happens very few the way that it happened with Eckhart. Virtually overnight, his ego just sort of dissolved overnight through great suffering. But for most of us, it's a gradual process, a gradual awakening. So for me, it has been, going through what we call that spiritual pendulum, swinging from, the pain body reaction to, being in stillness and feeling very content and happy with your life to that swing again. But each swing, if we can look at it as this, the suffering is our teaching. It's our teacher, not teaching, teacher. It can teach us. So as we grow in awareness, so if you look at awareness as this space or this light, infinite light of consciousness, shining on the form of what we call the ego, the unconscious self, that awareness you begin to see. So this is why the direct experience is so important, that each of us have to come to a point where we let go of the written word and directly experience it. Because without that direct experience, we're only keeping it inside our heads as memory, as mind. Consciousness, awareness, our beingness is not of the mind. The mind arises in consciousness, but it's not who we are. The mind is not who we are. So it's been for me this process of waking up, falling to sleep, waking up, falling to sleep, like going back and forth, until really you get to a point where you just go, my God, enough. Enough. I've had it. That's it. Enough. And then it's another evolutional stage of just awakening, so that your commitment of what I made many, many years ago, even though I was really committed, keeps growing and growing, and a new form of commitment almost comes, which means that new commitment to, okay, you know what? What is what is. If I swing into the lows, I swing into the lows. But because there's enough awareness now, those lows are not so low anymore. There's a story that is told. It's kind of a spiritual story where a disciple finds his master sitting on a rock with his hands up into his face, and he's weeping and weeping and weeping. And the disciple goes, Master, Master, why are you crying? And the master looks up from his hands and says, because I've just heard I've lost my son. So his son died, was killed. And then he goes back to weeping, and the disciple is kind of like, starts thinking, Master, Master, but if you say all this is an illusion, then why are you crying? And he looks up again, and he just says, because this is the saddest illusion of them all. So when we spiritually awaken, it doesn't mean that we get rid of emotions. We are human. And this is the beauty of, wow, when we are not identified with the emotion and we are separate from the emotion, so we know that we're the awareness. The emotions still happen. And you have this sense of great peace, even though you're going through the emotions. My father died last year, and I just found this great peace, even though I was sad. Like the spiritual, in the story, the spiritual master, his son died. It was sad. So we go through it. Wow, so what? We go through it. We all go through it because we're human. We're human and we're being. That's why we're called human beings. The being part is that vertical dimension of stillness. So being connected to what we can call the heavens, or it's not a heaven like it's up there. It's being in that vertical dimension. And even though, so if you imagine a cross, you see the vertical dimension, and then the horizontal dimension that goes across the vertical is the form dimension, the world. So the things in the world still happen. They come and they go. We're happy and we're sad, But when we're connected to this vertical dimension, the stillness within, you're unaffected by what happens on the horizontal plane. Unaffected, which I mean the eye of awareness, which is not a thing, not an object, the eternal subject. It's the eye of awareness is unaffected. All things come and go in this eye of awareness that we are. So when you ask the question, whether or not, where am I? Am I enlightened? So I could say from a point of view, yes, so are you. And from another point of view, if I had a pain body attack and I'm like, well, would I consider myself enlightened? Well, I can feel that sense of space here. I don't like to even answer that question because it's like, who's asking that question? Only the little me can ask a question like that, and who wants to know an answer of whether or not somebody is enlightened or not. We got to keep turning. The spiritual practice is always to turn inward. It doesn't matter about what Eckhart Tolle does. It doesn't matter about what Kim Ing does, or any spiritual person that is teaching. It's like, what is coming through? It's tapping into the essence of who we are and coming to that place and then expressing ourselves through the form here, the form there. As you consider a journalist, interviewer, it comes through you. You're just the open channel. And just like I'm the open channel, you can say. Not the eye of awareness, but this form, the body's the open channel. I just get out of the way and allow life then to flow through.
Eckhart teaches that when we awaken from unconscious to fully conscious living, we are naturally aligned with our God nature and thus bring into manifestation a new earth. What will that new earth be by your vision? How will the world and humanity change then?
I don't have a vision. I just know that when I am in that state, that dimension of stillness, there is what we can call it love, we can call it stillness. I know Eckhart doesn't like to use so much the word love because it has a lot of concepts around it, just like he doesn't like to use the word God so much because it has a lot of concepts. But I love the word love, I love the word God, because it's like letting go of those concepts. And when you are in that state, that dimension, there is only love, which is non-violence. So we will then, who knows what we will create? We'll create something maybe very beautiful, very wonderful. We just don't know. And I don't think I want to know, because spirituality, spirit, God consciousness is unknown. I don't know if anybody can really know. But what we can know and sense into is, am I awake? That's all we have to ask ourselves. Am I awake? So that life can flow through me and create through me. And when we know and have those direct experiences of stillness, we begin to understand the possibilities, the potential that is there. But we don't know the manifestation until it comes. Just like an artist might pick up his paintbrush and he just becomes still and he start painting. He may not even know what he's painting. Some do, but some don't. They don't know what they're painting, and then suddenly they see it. And then it's there. And our life is like a canvas. So will we create then through the unconditioned mind, which is stillness, or through the conditioned mind, which is ego? It's really our choice. The canvas is right there.
One of the questions that raises when we talk about new earth or new era or humanity going through transformation, which every parent wants to know, is how to raise our children, how to keep this natural awareness, a state of being present in them, alive and pure, while at the same time teaching and guiding them how to manage to live in this world we have around us today. So the question is how to not, so to say, screw up their purity and much bigger awareness they already have by nature with our own patterns and pain, which we try to help them to manage their lives in the world. Yeah. What do you suggest?
Yeah. I think probably every parent, when they begin to have children, they so much want to protect them and not want to have them go through the pain and suffering that they themselves went through. But unfortunately, we have no control over that. Because if we are not aware enough and awake enough in ourselves, so in our own lives, and we are just going to transmit that suffering, pass it on to our children, whether we do it consciously or unconsciously. Most of it, of course, is not going to be conscious. Most people are not going to consciously want to hurt their children. It's all unconscious. There's a verse in the Bible where it says, the sins of the father will be passed on from generation to generation. And what is that sin but unconsciousness? So if we're raising children from that unconscious state, that's what we're going to pass on. The more that we then begin to awaken, the more then we can pass on that awakened state, you can call it, to our children, because that's how we're relating to them. They've got this purity, this innocence. They're born. They don't think right away, right? We learn how to think. We learn words and all that, and they're just looking out through these pure, aware eyes, soaking in everything. I was actually just speaking with somebody after the event this evening, and she has a son, and I've known these people for a while, and her sister was there, and she's a single mother, but they have listened to Eckhart Tolle for years. They'll play it in front of their child, not talking to him about spirituality, nothing, but they just play it, and they themselves, so the two sisters, will speak about, what they go through and speak about just their awakening process. And children are so alert. Even when we think they're not listening, they are listening. I mean, that is what alert presence means, is that you can appear not to even be listening, but you are fully listening. They listen with their entire bodies, just soaking in everything like a wet sponge. So here, this child, this boy, had been listening to Eckhart Tolle from infancy until now he's, I believe, 14 years old. And she tells me she just can't believe how he is. She might ask, what are you thinking? I'm not thinking anything, Mom. There's no thoughts. Or if something happens, oh, well, so that happened. It doesn't matter, or it's not important. And he's just this happy kid. If we are not fully conscious yet, maybe you can just have that in your life. Play it. Play these tapes out loud for your children, not to get them to say, you must sit down and listen, and you must hear, you must learn to stay present, because I don't want you to lose it. We don't know what every individual needs to go through to awaken. And sometimes it may be that our child has to go through some suffering and some pain in order to awaken, to fully blossom into their own. And we know that. I have a 32-year-old daughter, and I remember when she left to go to Australia, and I went, wow, it's over, it's done. There's really no more in terms of, parenting or teaching. I'm still a parent, she still comes to me, but the bulk of it is over. And we just have to let them go. We have to let them go. And even during the process, even while they're living with us, it's like we have to let them go. We can guide them. We can point out and maybe perhaps tell them stories. And this is where the ancient, times, they often taught through stories. Tell them stories of our own process. Maybe some ways that we had suffered in our life, or what caused us suffering, or decision-making, or whatever. We can teach through our own personal stories and guide them that way. But most of all, they need space instead of filling their time with TV or computers or games. I see a lot of kids constantly, using their thumbs and stuff on their little whatever they're called, iPhones or whatever, or there was the little computers. Let them have moments of stillness where they're doing absolutely nothing, Just It's okay, it's just time to be still. But then ask yourself, are you giving yourself time to be still as well? Because they will mimic you, they will watch you. Oh, it's mommy's time to be still. You know, oh, do you need some time to be still? Maybe they're going through something. Do you need time to be still? They hurt inside to see their children hurting, so they'll want to fix it and take it away. But allow them to experience it, because they are going to truly learn through direct experience. We all do. If we're given that chance, we will learn through direct experience. Also, when you take walks with them, perhaps out in nature, most of us will start labeling things. Oh, isn't that a beautiful tree? Or, oh, geez, what kind of tree is that? What kind of flower is that? And then the moment that we label something, we cut off the flow of energy. We cut off our connection to life itself, the source, the energy. So instead of now labeling, maybe just don't label. And if they say, you know, which they all do at some age, what's that, what's that, what's that? You know, oh, we call it a tree. But before you do that, maybe before you say we call it a tree, and just say, oh, what do you feel with that when you look at that? What does it feel like to you? I'm in no thought if I'm looking at, there's some flowers that actually tickle me. The energy of that flower actually tickles my energy field, because energy goes beyond the body. So we all have this energy field. It's the one life that connects us all to other humans, to plants, to animals. And without any thought, we all vibrate at a certain energy. And there's some flowers I'll look at and it feels like it's literally tickling my energy field. So you can ask them, oh, how are you experiencing this? You know, how are you experiencing this thing that we call a tree, or this thing that we call a flower? Getting them to understand that the name, the label of that object is not the label, the name, the object. Just as your name is not who you are. The function that you play in this world is not who you are. It's a temporary form. And who you are is beyond any form. And that's the peace that stillness brings, and we get to experience that peace, that sense of aliveness.
You have also said that currently young energy, which is masculine, active, outwards directed, mostly predominates in the modern world. You teach with your presence through movement practice how to bring us back into ourselves by cultivating our yin side, feminine, accepting inwards direction. Will there ever be an energetic balance in the world? Or is it that on one era the yang side dominates, then the yin, and so on, back and forth? It will be always sort of fluctuating. Is it possible to have a totally balanced, harmonious world? And if so, how?
Well, in order to have a totally balanced, harmonious world, you have to be balanced inside. And then from that place, you'll see whether or not this world needs to be totally balanced. Because don't forget the yin-yang symbol, if you can imagine the yin-yang symbol. The yang side, which represents the color white, with that little dot of yin, which represents the color black. And it only takes that drop of yin to bring balance into yang, and vice versa. The yin being black, and it only takes that drop of white to bring balance. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a 50-50 thing. Do you understand that?
Yes, but is that then enough, so to say, fix our world, which is, let's say, full of yang, masculine, outwards, sort of machismo energy? Yeah. If there is just this one dot of yin, is that already enough to balance the world?
But don't forget, this one dot of yin amongst billions of people is a lot. It's a lot. Yang energy is a creative energy. It's creation. So it's going to bring into manifestation. That's yang. Yin is the reversed, where there's that space, that quietness, that allowing, that accepting. So in order to then create a new world, some form is going to happen. But will it come out of the form of the stillness, the yin, or will it come out of the form of already what the yang is, what we already know? And to create a new world, we're not going to be able to create it out of what we already know, because what we already know has failed, tremendously failed. So it has to come from a place of yin, the qualities of yin. It has to come from that space. So when it comes out of that space and comes through, the moment that it starts taking shape and form, that's what we can call yang. But it came out of stillness rather than the conditioned mind. And that's going to create the new world, a new earth. And if we all do that ourselves and not worry about somebody else, and if we all did it, and we are all going to eventually do it, you can call it more advanced than others. And I don't want it not advanced as in better, but just if you imagine that flower again, we're all at different stages of flowering, of opening, of the evolution of human consciousness growing. So that's the harmony, the balance. There was it was called the Peace Summit with the Dalai Lama, and Eckhart was one of the guests there. And there was a private dialogue with the Dalai Lama that we, meaning probably 100 other people as well, it was in this private dialogue. And the question came up to the Dalai Lama, why is there not any women? Don't you believe, I mean, you say that you believe in women's liberation and all that sort of stuff, but yet there's no women in the sect that traditionally they have. So you're the Dalai Lama, why don't you do something about it? And his answer was, right now it's almost like a 50-50 split between all the monks. 50% want women, the other 50 don't. And that was his answer. And I went away thinking, wow, yeah, but he's the Dalai Lama. All he has to say is, no, I want it this way, and then it's done. Women can get in there. And I didn't understand his answer. And I went away, and that evening, suddenly it occurred to me, oh my God, of course, he can't force anything on it, because that's yang. To make a force when there's not total alignment yet, so not everybody is in agreement, would be forcing his view onto a matter instead of allowing things. So the yin practice is allowing things to happen and unfold organically. So just only probably 50 years ago, you would have 100% of the monks say, no women. Women, no. But now there's 50%. So there is progress. We just can't push that progress. It's a gentleness. It's like, if you can imagine those old-fashioned keyholes and the lock, and if you try to force it open, it'll break the key, it'll break. But the yin is this gentle sort of wiggle. And that's what he does. His presence is gently wiggling, shaking up everybody to realize that consciousness is neither male or female. So why is it that we have divided it so? It's only the mind. The mind made this division. And it's to see that division. When we see the division that the mind makes, and it's always going to make those divisions, but when we recognize that this is the mind and it doesn't have to be this way, then we come from a different place. We're in a more aware, alert state of consciousness, of stillness, where there's no more separation.
When you made this example of Dalai Lama and involving women in the spiritual practice, maybe it is a silly question, but what do you think? Would the world be a better place when it would be ruled by, not maybe ruled, but guided by women, by female energy, by yin aspect? And also, have you noticed that there is a rediscovering of the feminine force happening all over the planet in spiritual movement nowadays? Women are searching for themselves, their femininity, the feminine power, this female force and strength that helps them to carry on. What do you think of all this? And also, have you thought about the term sacred femininity? If so, what is that for you?
I don't think so much in terms of when the feminine energy, the yin aspects kind of taking over. That's not what it is. I think we'll be making the same mistake. Or it's all the females have to take over. It's everybody within themselves has yin and yang. The males too need to cultivate this quality of yin. And just as the females also need to cultivate the qualities of yin, because I believe that we've kind of lost it. Some of us have lost it. We kind of swung to the more yang side, thinking we had to be more yang, be more stronger, the masculine side. So it is, we are returning, you can say, the feminine aspects of ourselves. It's like we're realizing, wow, boy, I'm still not happy. I've got a great job, I make a lot of money now, I'm in this world, and I'm still not happy. So what is it then? What brings us that happiness? But the state of consciousness that we call stillness. Ourselves that is not attached to yin or yang, but bringing that balance in ourselves through awareness. So when we are more aware, we naturally will then begin to balance ourselves out, because that awareness is a healing. Nobody can heal us. It's that state of stillness that brings the healing. Just like nobody can awaken you, only you yourself can go within and begin to awaken, because you're looking directly inside yourself. And we all need to bring more yin in, the feminine, that we call the feminine aspects, male and female. And that will restore the balance, the harmony in ourselves, internally, and in the world. It may mean that women will come into more of what we can call, I don't want to call it the feminine power, but it's the true power. The males, as they begin to then awaken and have the cultivation of the yin qualities within themselves, they too will come into their true power. But it's not belonging to anybody. It's not belonging to the male gender, not belonging to the female gender, or any particular person. It's the power of now, which is stillness itself. That's the true power. If we hang on to saying that it's somehow female or females are going to, if we take over this planet, we'll be able to run it better than how it's being run. I mean, really? Could that really be true? No, because anything that's manifested, we can say, is the past. So all thoughts, it's gone, it's past. What is now and what is present, our presence, is that unmanifested realm, the unmanifested, the consciousness prior to any form that brings healing and restoration to ourselves and to the world. But it has to start with each individual, because there is nothing wrong with the world out there. It's how we have been in the world and how we think of the world. Just like the example that I gave in today. You can open the window and it's raining. The rain has no problem that it's raining. The sky has no problem. The earth has no problem that it's raining. Only we can create the problem that it's raining by making the judgment, oh God, it's raining today. I don't want the rain. I want the sunshine. So we're not accepting the present moment. We're not accepting the beautiful grace of rain, which feeds us, feeds the plants, feeds the animals, gives us life. I mean, we ourselves are, I don't know what they say, 97% water, you know? So the balance has to come here, has to come within, because that's what the world then will emanate that and will manifest what needs to be then be manifested from this place of stillness, of love, acceptance. Will have those qualities.
You have been partner of Eckhart Tolle, who is now one of the most influential spiritual teacher of our modern times, for about 15 years, if I'm correct.
I think so.
What is the most asked question from you about him? I bet every journalist comes and asks something.
The most asked question.
When you're like, here it comes again.
I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm asked that so much anymore. I have to go back in my memory here. It's not just one particular question, but it may be the idea that people may have. The idea of who he is, what he may be like, where he is just a simple human being, but more being than human. So when I say that, I mean, we are all human beings. He still has the body, he still has the mind. The only difference is that there's a lot less of identification with the form.
But you also teach about our form, our body, which has been called the temple of our soul, which is how we have manifested into this particular reality, whether it is an illusion or not. Why is body important? Most of the women in the world are concerned with their body, but not in a spiritual way, as much as the form. But still, if we are talking about spiritual development, why is body important? How to use body to achieve deeper states of consciousness, to develop, to go further, deeper?
Well, the body has a relative importance. And what I mean by that is that the primary importance is your state of consciousness. So realizing that the eternal I. Why I say the body has that relative importance is because we do have a body. When you are in this aware state, you realize, wow, I've got this. And how am I treating this? It'd be like saying if an awakened person was a violent person, and yet we do violence to our own bodies often. When we begin to awaken, we see, oh my gosh, these beautiful, precious hands, like, wow. And we begin to want to take care of the body because there's a love there. There's an appreciation. Not that there's an attachment, there's a difference. So when we become attached or identified with a form, then suffering begins. We become, overly sort of, you can say judgmental on things. Like oftentimes for women, we look at these, not only women, but it could be men, these beautiful, youthful babies with these beautiful skin and, the big eyes and the light shining through. And then, we grow up and the mind will take this and say, oh, this is how it should be all the time. Well, right. I mean, we all grow old and we all lose that sense of, we call nice skin. We're all going to shrivel up like a prune sooner or later. But when we become attached to a certain stage, of what the body is, then that's when we begin to become imbalanced in ourselves. You know, not only in our minds, but psychologically, emotionally, and physically. So we just enjoy the moment as we can. And when we enjoy the moment, I mean, I actually feel younger than I probably did 20 years ago. So there's this sense of vibrancy, of aliveness that's within us. And that chi, that prana, that life force, the stillness keeps that youthfulness. You can put somebody side to side. Eckhart is now, let me think how old he is now. I think he's 60, he's going to be 65, or he is 65, I can't remember now. And you can put another person that age who is always thinking. And you can probably see the difference just in the quality of what they, you know, that person who is coming from the dimension of thought all the time is going to be probably 10, maybe even sometimes 15 years older looking than you could be at the age that we are. You know, it's stillness keeps us youthful.
That's a good advice. Speaking about Eckhart's teachings, what is the most important thing or point or lesson or realization for you that you have learned from his teaching? Is that being awareness? Is that the awareness is the key?
I could say yes and no. His teaching points to, you know, being present, being here and now, and of course it is awareness. But it was probably through my own process of swinging back and forth to realizing that, wow, there isn't really anything, no matter how much meditating I do, if I try to meditate, it's not going to make me awaken any faster. It's not to say that meditation doesn't help, because I believe there's a purpose for that practice, because it gives us those many glimpses of who we are, that stillness. So that meditation helps. But it's realizing, wow, just awareness alone is really enough, because it changes everything. If you're aware and you realize you're not this body, you're not any thoughts, you're not any emotions, because they come and go, and who you are is this awareness. It's not that I invented it or anything, because it's a very ancient old teaching. Awareness, awareness. There's a story, as I said in the teaching, you know, the master said to the disciple, you know, give me something that I can, you know, walk away with so I can learn how to be awake. How can I awaken? Awareness, awareness. So it's nothing old. And Eckhart does mention and does speak about and point to awareness. But it comes through in all different ways for him, as it will come through in different ways for me and for another spiritual teacher, because we're multitude of people and different ways that we learn, different ways we take in things. So if one pointer isn't going to work, there's going to be another pointer coming through, but it all points to the same thing. Just like I believe all religions deep down in its core points to the exact same thing. And that is consciousness. We can't even really name it. We name it that. Some people call it God. Some people call it spirit. Some people call it silence, stillness, whatever the name. It's just a name. Just like we're given the names. So we can call each other and we can turn our heads and say, oh yes, you're talking to me, you know, but we're not our name.
Sometimes I discuss these topics with different friends, people, and before coming here to do these interviews, I went into extensive discussion about the ego and liberating from the dominance of the ego and so on. And then an interesting question arises, which is that on their way to awakening, person might be afraid that once we give up ego, we get liberated from the dominance of the ego, what is left for us? Maybe our lives will dry out, all the juice will go out, this emotional liveliness will diminish, we will be just still sitting there empty, nothing happening, and we lose that which makes us human in our all these varieties, this personality, the uniqueness, we have all these things. So what is your opinion about that, if somebody who is struggling with these thoughts?
Oh, I think we'll become more unique. Because we are, I mean, there's every single person on this planet, which is billions of people, there's not one single person that is the same. Not on the physical level or even in the expression of how they express. It could be similar, but there's never, I mean, even our thumbprint, our fingerprints can identify. Not one single person has the same fingerprints as I do or you do. So there will be more of a uniqueness coming through. And when the person becomes afraid, that's the mind being afraid. The mind is afraid of the known, you can say. So in other words, the unknown, how can anybody be afraid of the unknown? It's unknown. So what is there to be afraid of? But the thought, your idea of what the unknown is, that's what we're afraid of. Are the thoughts and the ideas that we have about the unknown. The unknown is unknown. Don't know it at all. But the mind will make up stories about what the unknown may be. Oh, but I got to do a lot of sitting meditation. I can get the stillness when I sit and meditate. So maybe, and then they may have trouble being still while they're amidst the world. And that's part of the awakening process, is how to bring stillness amidst the world. And it's not so much of a how, but just more of a growing and expanding and unfolding into the consciousness that you are, the awareness that you are. And then you just create, you move, you speak through that place. And it's all fine. It's, oh, okay. Maybe nothing is going to be said. Maybe we won't talk in the same way. Maybe we won't need to talk. Maybe the faculties of our sixth sense may come through. Because we all have that ability. We all are intuitive. We all can read each other. So maybe we won't even have to even speak so much anymore. Because we'll just know. Because we're living through our intuitive self rather than through the mind, which is thought, which is conditioned.
What is the most wrongly understood aspect or point or thing in Eckhart's teachings? I'm sure you have had tons of conversations about his teachings, the essence of his teachings. Have you noticed something that people quite often don't get what he means differently?
I would probably say what I observe, what may be misunderstood is because they understand it, and you can understand it, so there's something in you that understands this, but then they keep the understanding of it up in their heads. So they keep their spiritual practice up here. So the probably misunderstood thing is that it's an intellectual, because he is very intellectual in a way, like he's gifted in his writing and his speaking, and that's all intellectual based. He's able to use thoughts and words and all that. So his teaching is actually, even though he says it so beautifully in words, is actually a direct experience, is to experience this directly. Because stillness is not about understanding through the mind. You cannot understand God, you cannot understand consciousness, stillness through the mind. So, and you can only understand it, not in the mind, not through the mind, but the understanding that is through a direct experience of it. So we need to shift that focus of, oh yeah, I get it, to, okay, where are you getting it? Because awakening is a whole body awakening. Your whole body becomes alive and you feel that. That's why he calls it the inner body, that feeling of aliveness within. Because your whole body is vibrating with this pure life energy. And we experience that. Just as we get to experience even emotions. We can experience, you can say, but it's not, it's so limited words. We can experience it, yet we can't experience it. See, once you try to point to it, or once you try to speak about it, you're almost taking it out of the directness of it. You're making a form, turning it into a form, when it's formless. But yet we can actually know it.
At the end of every show, I have a small questionnaire to which every guest who comes to the show always answers. It's same 5 questions I always ask from everybody. So please answer to these in a whatever way you want. The first question is, what is the meaning of life?
To be here now.
What will the tomorrow bring? How and to where shall we move on from here as individuals and as humankind?
What will tomorrow bring? I have no idea. We'll have to wait until tomorrow.
But there is no tomorrow.
That's right.
So we don't know.
So that's right, we don't know. So when we say it's tomorrow, it's going to be now. So when you ask me that for right in this moment, what will tomorrow bring? I don't know what it'll bring. You can have hopes, but not to be attached to the hopes either, because life might bring something else. It's a surprise. And the mind wants to get out of the surprise and know.
What should a person do or know to be happy? What is the formula of happiness?
To know thyself. The self as the consciousness that we are. Because that's the uncaused happiness.
If you are appointed to an assignment to greet aliens from the space in the name of humankind, what would you say to them?
What would I say to an alien? Welcome to planet Earth. I don't know. I haven't approached an alien. Actually, maybe we are all aliens in some form. So really, if we can approach just people as all aliens that we don't know, then we will be able to see them and view them from the unconditioned mind, because we don't know. And then we can watch our fear that comes up, right? So if you can just imagine an alien and you go, oh, what happens within ourselves? Do we become afraid, or do we become open and welcoming? So every person is an alien because we don't know them, really. We only know, you can say, of them. So maybe what they've done, or their name, or the experiences that you've had with them, which may be good and maybe not so good. And then that becomes the filter. So if we can undo those filters, everybody is an alien.
The last question is, what do you recommend for listeners to investigate for some more?
What do I recommend? To go into yourself. Reading spiritual books help, but once you read them, turn your attention inward, because this is the discovery. You're discovering yourself. You're not discovering yourself through a book, but you're discovering yourself. So who is this self? Who are you? Beyond thought, beyond your emotions. Who are you? And find out. Look, listen, be still, and know that I am God. Beautiful verse in the Bible.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Kim-Eng, very much for coming to the show Hallo Kosmos in Radio 2 in Estonian Public Broadcasting. Thanks, and I wish you all the best and good luck with everything.
Thank you. It's been a joy being here with you.
Thank you.
See on Raadio 2.